Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Welcome back, friends. I knew you'd all be by tonight. Now that you've put in all your Amazon orders and you got your Christmas tree up and all that, or your Hanukkah bush, or even your Kwanzaa stick. But no matter how you ring in the holidays, we've all got one thing in common. We all love Skeeter and Yancey. Especially Chester. And yes, I promised you could come in tonight, but if I catch you snooping around for presents, you're back in the drink. Hear me? Good. Well, come on in, friends. Oh, yeah, that's better. So tonight, we welcome back Lynn Jenkins for the third installment of our favorite troublemakers, Skeeter and Yancey. So smoke 'em if you've got 'em and drink those glasses to the bottom, y'all. 'Cause old Drew Blood has a tale to tell. But first, the rigmarole.
Howdy, you're listening to the standard edition of this program. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy ad-free versions of this and all our other episodes, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu and sign up today. You'll get instant access to the whole kit and caboodle, including millions of tales from our audio archives dating back to 2012. Ready to throw your hat in the ring, authors? Send your stories to drewbloodhorror@gmail.com. If selected, you'll get the full treatment.
So, this is where I usually tell you what story we're doing tonight. But since I did that already, I'll add this. Y'all are in for some serious similes. So, without further delay, I give you, from author Lynn Jenkins, Skeeter and Yancey Do Dallas. Yancey walked at a steady pace, pushing the wheel of the yardage counter out in front of him. He slowed when the counter ticked over 0780 and began counting aloud. 781, 782. He stopped and dropped the galvanized tin bucket that landed with a dull metallic clank. Before turning to make the return trip, he leaned down and scooped up a handful of soft, grainy blow sand, stood and let it sift out off his outstretched palm, each grain telling the story as it fell back to earth. East to west, about 2 miles an hour, he thought out loud. He reset the counter and walked back to the pavilion where Skeeter and the Levis brothers sat behind one of the cement tables pretending to be asleep. I hate to tell you this, fellers, but all the beauty sleep in the world ain't gonna help you ugly bastards, he said, waving the counter in front of them as proof that the bucket was set at the iconic distance. Skeet pulled out his wallet and fished out a $10 bill.
Let's make this interesting,
he said, dropping the bill on the table. James and Abe each ponied up, and Yancey scrounged a 10 spot out of the wad of cash in his front pocket. He pulled off his orange vest, put in his earplugs, and reverently picked up his granddad's 1950 standard issue K-31 Swiss rifle and began adjusting the slide on the open sight. Skeet said something, and James and Abe laughed, but Yancey was 100 years in the past and halfway around the world. This was something he had been waiting to do ever since he watched Tom Selleck take those 3 legendary shots. Hollywood special effects or not, it went on Yancey's bucket list. See what I did there? With the sight set, he pulled back the bolt and slid in one of the shells he had loaded the night before and closed the bolt. He stepped up to the firing line and stood like a pitcher on the mound, searching downrange for his target. Then, a minuscule early morning glint reflected off the silver facade of the bucket. Yancey raised the rifle and pulled the butt to his shoulder. All together, Abe, James, and Skeeter asked,
Are you quite certain, Mr. Tannehill, that you wouldn't like the bucket a bit closer?
Yancey stood stock still and squoze, and the rifle kicked. Skeeter watched a plume of dust rise behind the bucket through a spotting scope that rested on a tripod on the table. After a couple of excruciating seconds passed, the faint clank of metal on metal reached their ears.
Quite sure,
Yancey said, staying faithful to the script. He pulled the bolt back, releasing the empty shell in the puff of smoke, then quickly reloaded, aimed and fired. This time before the reaffirming clang returned. He was all set to take his third and final shot when the second clank carried back on the breeze. Yancey lowered the rifle and turned to his amigos.
Why don't we make this real interesting?
He said dryly. No one had a clue what he had in mind, so their response was to simply stare up at him blankly. Yancey turned to face the firing range once again, only this time he put his right foot forward.
No pissing way,
Skeet said. Yancey pulled the butt to his left shoulder, lined up his shot, and fired. Skeet watched the shot hit, then gathered up the $40 off the table and slipped it into the pocket of his fourth favorite Western shirt. The telltale sound of a bucket being perforated by a hot lead reached them, and Skeeter passed the cash to Yancey.
Not bad for an old man,
he said, grinning like a chimp on a TGIF poster. James and Abe patted Yancey on the back and went off to practice their quick draws at the far end of the pavilion. Skeeter turned on his phone and, seeing he had missed a call, tapped Lana's name on the screen and waited. Yancey lowered the sights on the antique rifle and gently slid it back into its leather sheath.
Hey, dollface, what's up?
Skeet asked. Now, back when Emily first moved in with Yancey and Lana moved in with Skeeter, they decided it was about time to start acting their age. Start acting more mature, that is. After all, they were both successful business owners, and they had become very well-respected members of the community since bringing back the handful of abductees from a certain secret military base. They stopped calling each other pig lickers. Skeeter stopped plugging one nostril and blowing snot out the other. And believe it or not, Yancey stopped making offensive body noises, or at least apologizing when one slipped by. This extra polite behavior lasted for almost 2 months. Then one night, when they were all sitting around Skeeter's kitchen table playing poker, Yancey hit Skeeter with a 4 and a 5 of clubs, which, if he had gotten a 5 and 6 of clubs, he would have had a royal flush. Skeet went off. First, he called Yancey a sheep-shagger, accusing him of cheating and demanding he roll up his sleeves. Then Yancey called Skeeter a bull milker. They rose and went for each other's throats, knocking over the card table, sending chips and cards flying. Lana and Emily watched bemusedly as their big, strong men reverted back to their adolescence right before their eyes. By the time the dust had settled, the mature adults lay battered, broken, dead on the floor, never to be seen or heard from again. And up through the ashes rose the immature, undomesticated Skeeter and Yancey of old, grinning like a couple of teenagers skipping school. Remember the old saying, "To thine own self be true, y'all." Yancey picked up his AR, slid in a 50-round clip, and began firing rapidly downrange.
Come get some, you sons of bitches! Your fucking zombies ain't going to get my brain!
Skeet put a finger in one ear and held the phone tight against the other. Yancey set the safety and put the rifle down.
Help me, Skeet. They got me.
Yancey clutched his hands to his throat and choked.
Skeet, help. They're killing me.
He fell to the floor and rolled to his back.
Straight for nothing, asshole.
And gurgled his dying breath. Anyone else would have felt like a rube asking if there were really zombies attacking them. But with all the crazy situations Skeeter and Yancey find themselves in, the question seemed as natural to Lana as how's the weather.
Yeah,
Skeet smirked.
There were a few zombies, but they tried to eat Yancey's brain and they starved to death.
Poor zombies.
Yancey overheard Lana say. He stood up, wiping the gum and chew spit off his back, and walked down to watch James and Abe shoot the paper plates that were screwed to survey stakes and planted about 10 yards out. They leaned back and counted in unison.
3, 2, 1.
And fired so quickly it was impossible to tell which one was faster. Yancey had entered them in the Mountain Man Rendezvous Quick Draw Challenge and felt pretty optimistic about their chances. When Lana hung up, Skeet waited to tap the end button. There was a barely audible click. Then a few seconds later, the phone clicked again, and the screen went black. Yancey had been the first to notice the strange phenomena. Once they started paying attention, they noticed strangers in town leering, then looking away when they were noticed, black SUVs following at a distance, and even the occasional drones circling high above. One early morning, when Yancey and Abe were out pulling a tire off the backhoe to take to town and get fixed, he spotted a drone hovering just above the treetops. So he dropped his britches and mooned the damn thing. Slapping his cheek, he hollered,
Butter my ass and call me a biscuit, you spine sons of bitches!
The drone flew up and into a cloud and disappeared. Skeet walked behind the shooting table, sliding his phone back into his pocket.
Sorry, fellas, we got ahead,
he said.
What's going on?
I'll tell you on the way.
They gathered up their arsenal and headed for the house in Skeet's megacab.
Boys, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to cut out for a week or two,
Skeet said, looking at Yancey, then the brothers in the mirror.
What's up, boss?
Abe asked.
Well, apparently my sister's called the house looking for me.
James snorted from the back seat.
You mean the sister who hasn't spoken to you since you broke her fiancé's nose?
Skeet smiled in spite of the serious situation.
Yeah, but he never called me buckaroo again. Anyway, to make a long story short...
Too late.
James snorted again.
Abe?
Skeet said, and Abe backhanded James.
To make a long story short...
Skeet paused. The cab was silent.
My niece Debbie was going to the University of Texas in Dallas, but she came up missing about a week ago. The cops haven't found shit, so I'm gonna go see what I can find out.
Skeet, you got lost going to the auction in Richmond. How are you gonna find your way around Dallas?
Before Skeet could answer, Yancey said,
It just so happens I'm going to Dallas to buy some sheep pellets,
Abe said.
That's funny,
Skeet said, playing along.
I never heard you talking about a trip to Dallas.
Oh, yeah,
Yancey thought quick.
There's a big sale going on. 2 weeks only. Didn't you say something about needing a translator, too?
Abe asked. Skeet adjusted the mirror to see Abe, who sat behind him.
This might not be a pleasure cruise.
Before Skeet could finish, Abe had drawn his pistol and was holding it between Skeeter and Yancey.
Have gone, we'll travel, amigos,
he said coolly. Skeet readjusted the mirror.
What about you, hermanito? You want to see the bright lights, too?
James shrugged.
Who's going to take care of the ranches?
Skeet smiled, kind of like Wile E. Coyote, when one of his fail-safe plans pops into his head.
Oh, no,
Yancey said.
Oh, yeah. Those two have had it too good for too long.
The truth was, Skeet's cows and bulls were turned out to pasture. The hay wouldn't need to be cut for 2 more weeks, and Yancey's last ewe had lambed last week.
Hell,
Skeet said.
Those 2 city girls might even start liking the smell of shit.
Yancey had turned in an insurance claim when his truck got totaled by a family of bloodthirsty hillbillies, a hybrid hogcat, and Skeeter driving like a NASCAR reject to save their lives. After 6 months of retelling his wild story, minus the part about the hogcat, the insurance company finally came through. So what did he buy, you ask? A Power Stroke 250 with custom front and rear bumpers, 8,000-pound winch, 4-inch leveling kit, 40-inch mutters on blackout custom wheels, and one of those air horns that sound like a train whistle. When Skeet saw it and rolled his eyes, Yancey said,
Why mess with perfection?
Not long after that, the Humvee they had borrowed from a secret military base disappeared out of Skeet's driveway in the middle of the night, and his old '69 Fleetside was parked in its place. Hell, it even had a full tank of gas. It was kind of like the government was saying, let's just forgive and forget. And both Skeeter and Yancey knew better than to press the issue. Bright and early the next morning, Skeet was stowing the last of his gear in the back seat of his pickup when he heard the gravel churn under wheels in the driveway. He didn't bother turning around since he figured it was Yancey chomping at the bit to get going. He heard a door shut and the approach of footsteps.
"What's up?"
A familiar voice asked. He smiled and returned,
Chicken's butt.
and in two-part harmony they said,
Turn it up and take a suck. Corn dog.
Skeet said, turning to give his nephew a manly hug.
"How are you, Skeeter?"
Brian asked. Skeet's features darkened.
Where's that sister of yours?
"I wish I knew,"
Brian said, shaking his head.
"Usually she calls or at least texts me on the weekends, but the weekend come and went without a word. Her phone's out of service. She won't even return my emails.
Have you called the college?
Brian smiled, then the smile turned to a grimace.
What?
Skeet asked reluctantly.
Well,
Out with it.
Skeet said with the patience of a hot cattle prod.
she's not actually in college."
Brian said.
Keep talking.
Brian breathed deep, then let it out slow, mustering his courage.
"She works in a strip club."
He blurted. It felt like dropping a heavy boulder,
She what?
and now it felt like the boulder landed on his foot.
She's a stripper?
Skeeter's breath felt like it could melt steel.
"She's an exotic dancer."
Brian corrected. Skeet stared through the back of Brian's head. Finally, Brian said,
"She's a stripper. She's only doing it to make enough money to pay for next semester's tuition, though."
She's never heard of flipping burgers, cutting hair, hell, shoveling shit?
Before Brian could start spouting excuses, Skeet asked.
Do your parents know?
Brian's eyes went wide.
"Debbie made me promise not to tell."
He said with more than a little panic in his voice.
Okay.
Skeet said. But just when Brian decided it might be safe to exhale, Skeet said.
But I didn't promise shit.
After some fast talking, Skeet's nephew had convinced him not to call his parents. At least not yet. A little more sweet talking, old buddy old pal got him invited to tag along to Dallas. Now, much like his uncle, Brian was nowhere near mature. Mentally speaking, that is. And even though he stood a couple of inches taller and a whole lot thicker through the shoulders than the old cowpoke, Skeeter still cast a big shadow in his nephew's eyes. The last thing he wanted was for the old man to catch him boobing, even if he had a good reason. So when he felt his eyes welling up, he looked away, pretending to take interest in a cow lapping away on a salt block. Of course, Skeet knew his nephew was fighting back the tears, so being the super-sensitive type, he said,
Your mascara's running, Tammy Faye.
They laughed in that comfortable way that old friends laugh, and the tension passed. Brian and his sister were absolutely nothing alike. Where she was a straight-A student in high school, doing the whole drill team, cheerleader, drama club, everybody look at me thing, Brian got himself expelled 4 times in 3 years for blowing shit up. His first experiment with explosives involved the principal's hubcaps, all 4, all at once. That cost his parents $400, and Brian a month in DT. The next year, he thought it would be cool to blow up the scoreboard when Roosevelt High won their homecoming game. And it was pretty awesome until his parents got the bill for $3,000 for a new scoreboard. Exasperated, his parents asked why he blew the crotch out of the Teddy Roosevelt statue that had stood sentinel in front of the school for over 80 years. Reluctantly, Brian admitted,
"'Cause Isabel Slog dared me to."
At the time, he thought it was worth it, but by the time he got out of detention, Isabel was dating Steve Hemstreet, the JV quarterback. Oh yeah, FYI, the bill to fix the statue of the 26th President of the United States, $9,499. Now, you might be saying to yourself, wait a minute, that was only 3 explosions. Well, hold your horses, partner. I'm getting there. Okay, picture in your mind. It's a beautiful afternoon. A slight breeze keeps the temperature mildly comfortable for the mass of proud parents, grandparents, and siblings sitting on the bleachers overlooking the football field. By the grace of God and the Tennessee Juvenile Corrections Board, a tall, broad-shouldered kid with a devious grin stands in line, slowly advancing until it's his turn to cross the stage and receive his diploma. His parents exhale sighs of relief, knowing they've heard the last shrill screams of a pissed-off principal. But before stepping off the stage, the excited graduate tapes something to his diploma, lights a fuse, and throws it in the air. The explosion rocks the stage, and confetti rains down on the principal's crimson bald head as he screams in his shrill voice,
Mr. and Mrs. Sanderson!
That's how Brian ended up in the Army. Since he had just turned 18 the week before graduation, it was either the military or prison. Brian's parents thought they'd be getting a call from some drill sergeant after the first week, begging them to come pick up their kid. But amazingly, Brian had taken to the Army like a duck to a sewer pond. And all because of those two little words, ordnance training. He had had no idea there were so many ways to blow shit up. Thank you, Principal Felder. When Brian got out of the military, he got licensed and started his own demolition business. In 3 years, he was the most sought-after demo man in the tri-state area. He picked up the nickname Corn Dog on account of the fact that whenever anyone would ask how many explosives a job would take, Brian would say,
Oh, I settled that size. About 2 cases of corn dogs, or 7 pillars in an elevator shaft. 3 times 7 carried to 6. I'd say about 300 corn dogs and 300 yards of dental floss.
While Skeeter was in the house saying his goodbyes to Lana, Corn Dog made 2 trips to his Land Rover, lugging back heavy green wooden boxes. He slid them in the bed of Skeet's truck, then draped a tarp over them and tied it down with bungee cords. He shut the tailgate and settled down in the passenger seat. Skeet slid behind the wheel, smelling faintly of perfume. Corn Dog, sounding eerily like a half-wit hillbilly, said,
You sure do smell purty.
Skeet thought about how far it was from Lexington to Dallas. Yancey pulled into Skeet's driveway, pulling up alongside Skeet's coal roller. Seeing Corn Dog, he hollered,
You haven't even left the house yet, and you're already picking up hitchhikers.
Corn Dog reached out the window and gave Yancey a fist bump.
You still molesting sheep?
Corn Dog asked.
No, they formed a neighborhood watch. Hell, I can't even be there when they're being sheared because they don't want me seeing them naked.
James and Abe didn't have much to say when Corn Dog asked how they were doing. Both of them remembered quite clearly the few years back when the little shit got sent to Skeet's place for the summer, so Skeet could try and knock some sense into the little terrorist. James had only been green-breaking a rank 3-year-old quarter horse for 3 days when Brian thought it would be funny to throw a handful of firecrackers under the already leery gelding. When James drug himself up off the ground, Brian recognized that look in his eyes. It was the same look that Principal Felder had in his eyes when Brian built a homemade cannon in the shop class and used it to blow a hole in the wall just above the instructor's desk. Luckily, the instructor was off flirting with the gym teacher at the time. The cost? $1,700 and community service. Corn Dog's parents were madder than a pair of evil ghosts draped in My Little Pony sheets. In an effort to make up for his antics that summer, Brian coaxed Kent Bastian, the old farmer 3 fields over, to let him put a few mason jars at the back of his silage pit before he started filling it. He covered the jars with strips from one of his old T-shirts, and through the summer the juice seeped into the jars, ripening and fermenting. The next spring, when the last of the silage had been fed, Kent brought the jars by Skeet's place. Of course, he stayed to watch the guinea pig sample the murky green ambrosia. When Yancey, James, and Abe arrived, they decided the best way to go about it was to all partake at once. Kent counted down, and they tipped back their jars and chucked down healthy snorts of the home brew. The next day, when Skeet stopped seeing 2 of each number on his phone, He called Brian and ripped the little bastard a blue streak up one side and down the other.
Oh, shit.
Brian said.
I meant to call you. I did some research and found out. That's how you make biofuel.
For the sake of finding his sister, James and Abe decided to let him live. But as James put it,
once we find her, amigo, the little bastard might end up muerto in a ditch.
They finally got the wagons rolling, with Yancey's Fordelay leading the way and Skeet's Dodge-O-Matic bringing up the rear. After a few miles of driving in silence, Skeeter asked,
So what else don't your parents know about that sister of yours?
Corndog wasn't in the habit of bad-mouthing his sister, but there had been many a time he could have deflected some of the heat away from himself by throwing her under the bus. That golden halo she wore when she was around her parents was more tarnished than they could have ever guessed. Hell, more often than not, he'd take the blame for her less than perfect behavior, especially in the last couple of years since she'd moved to Dallas.
She'd always let me know when she was sneaking off on a spring break to Miami, or Cabo San Lucas, or wherever the wildest party was gonna be that year. As far as Mom and Dad knew, she was hermited away in her dorm room studying. Funny thing was, even with all the partying, she still got straight A's.
Skeet shook his head. This was all news to him, but instead of thinking less of his one and only niece, he started feeling a newfound fondness for the little hellraiser. As far as Skeet was concerned, the less she was like her hoity-toity mom and city slicker dad, the better. When they reached the long straightaway between Memphis and Little Rock, Skeeter asked his nephew what had gotten his parents so pissed off that they sent the little menace to live with him for the summer. Corndog thought back and smiled.
I don't think it was any one thing in particular,
he said.
I'll just give you a few examples.
Putting his index fingers together, he ticked off the stunts he could remember.
We tore down Principal Felder's car and put it back together in the girls' locker room. Not very original, but still funny. He was madder than the ace dwarfs that didn't get a part in Sleeping Beauty, 'cause his name was Dickhead. I put smoke bombs under the hood of my dad's truck and wired the fuse to the ignition. So when he started it, he thought his engine was on fire. He was madder than a rabbit that a bear just used to wipe his ass on. Let's see,
he said, thinking back. Then he smiled again and went on.
I followed my mom to the grocery store with her spare keys, and every time she reached for the door handle, I pushed the panic button. Even the cop that was watching thought it was funny. She was madder than a far-sighted bear that accidentally mistook a porcupine for a rabbit.
Skeet drew in a hissing breath.
The next time she went to the store, I moved her SUV to the other side of the parking lot. It took her 45 minutes to find it. She was madder than a sumo wrestler with diaper rash. I took a spare wheel to welding class, cut around the lug holes and welded it back off center. Then I put it on my sister's car. That one backfired, 'cause when she realized what I did, she drove it all over town with her girlfriends. She was a happier than a piano player with 12 fingers. I propped a welding rod up through the seat from the back floorboard, under the seat cover of my dad's truck. I never heard such a high-pitched scream come from a man. He was a madder than an alcoholic with a rusty zipper. Let's see. I tied a roll-up tarp to the back of my sister's car with 4 lengths of sash cord. When she got up to about 40, the tarp rolled off the bumper and opened like a drag chute. I guess it about put her through the windshield. She was a madder than a belly dancer with a slip disc.
Skeet gave up on the disproven uncle routine and laughed as he pictured the scenes.
When Deb got in her car to go to a Halloween party, I sat up in the back seat wearing a hockey mask and holding a kitchen knife. She had to change her pants on that one and was madder than a marching band at a dead end.
Corndog forgot which finger he counted last, so he gave up on counting and continued.
I smeared grease on the door handle on my daddy's truck, and when he pulled the handle, his hand slipped off. He landed on his ass and skidded across the grass. He was 10 minutes late for work and madder than a cannibal on a vegan diet. The next week, I smeared grease on his windshield wiper just before a big rainstorm. He was 20 minutes late for work and madder than a squirrel with a nut allergy. Still, I guess that's better than a prostitute with the same problem.
Skeet mulled it over, then grinned.
I tied zip ties to the drive shaft on my mom's SUV so they would ping on the gas tank. The guys at the mechanic shop thought that was a good one. She was a madder than a clean pig. When Sis was off to college for the first time, I shoved a broom handle up a stuffed skunk's ass and slid it under her car. When she went to get in, I attacked her ankle with it. She had to change her pants again. That time she was madder than a pill popper with lockjaw. I tied a rubber snake to my mom's inside door handle, so when she opened the door, it landed on her lap. She was a madder than a hog collar with the hiccups. I got one of those oogle horns off the internet and wired it to my sister's brake lights. She was really popular that day and madder than a skunk that sprays silly string. I shifted my dad's transfer case into neutral. He spent 25 minutes trying to figure out what was wrong with his truck and damn near got fired that time. He was a madder than a peg-leg pirate with termites. Then he got sent to Nashville on the business trip, so I went to the thrift store and picked up some supplies. Then about midnight, I slipped out and installed new accessories. Apparently they weren't very impressed at the corporate office when he pulled up in the parking lot with an overstuffed Double D bra stretched across the grill. He was a madder than a dude trying to say perfunctory with a mouthful of crackers. And when he got home, Mom wasn't impressed with a giant pair of panties stretched across the tailgate. She was a madder than a pink pit bull wearing a yellow tutu. I put baby powder in the air vents in Mom's SUV and cranked the fan all the way up. When she started it, whoosh! She made me clean that mess. I was a madder than a leprechaun with a pot full of dog shit. I disconnected the ground on my dad's battery, then ran the garden hose up from the bottom, kinked the hose and closed the hood on it. Hell, how was I supposed to know he was going to a meeting with some of the company's most important clients? He was only a few minutes late, but he was still madder than a cop on a gluten-free diet, though. I broke into my sister's car, tuned the radio to a televangelist station, cranked it all the way up and stole the knobs. She was a madder than a jogger, stuck behind a herd of cows with scours.
Every time Skeet thought that had been the last story, Corndog told another one.
Holy shit,
he thought.
Did the kid ever sleep?
Corndog took a deep breath and went on.
That was just some of the shit I did to their vehicles, not to mention the glitter bombs in their Christmas presents, exploding birthday cakes, exploding turkeys at Thanksgiving, exploding toilets, exploding lawn ornaments, and so on. The whole family were madder than Santa's reindeer when he went on the John Madden diet on Christmas Eve. 3 turduckens and a 2-liter bottle of Diet Coke.
By the end, his dad had developed a nervous habit of glancing over his shoulder about every 10 seconds. Mom was going to counseling twice a week, and Debbie spent most of her nights with girlfriends. Skeet took out a hanky, wiped the tears from his eyes and the snot from his nose, and asked,
You ever regret playing all those pranks on your poor family?
Corndog laughed sarcastically.
Have you met my family?
He asked rhetorically.
They're the biggest snobs I've ever met, and I damn sure didn't want Debbie turning out like them.
Yancey pulled into a choke and puke off the freeway, and Skeet glanced at the clock on the dash. He'd gotten so caught up in the misadventures of Corndog, the hours and miles had passed unnoticed. There were a lot of things he had assumed about his nephew, but now he was starting to realize Corndog was simply misunderstood. For the most part. Sure, he could be a pain in the ass, but that was just his way of rebelling against an arrogant bully of a father and a mother trying desperately to hold on to her prom queen youth and popularity. What decent red-blooded American kid wouldn't go a little nuts? Yancey signaled and hung a left that led to a small mom-and-pop truck stop out in the middle of a barren wasteland. Skeet checked his fuel gauge.
Damn, we've gone through half a tank,
he said, pulling up next to the pumps. Debbie opened her eyes to a squint to filter the midday sunlight that spilled into the room through the massive fissures left behind when the cement walls toppled in on themselves many years ago, shattering like sheets of glass on the floor. She groaned in agony, trying to stretch her legs like she had done 100 times before, with the result of being the same. Before her knees were even halfway straight, her bare feet pressed against the chicken wire that enclosed the wood-frame cage. She cleared her parched throat and whispered meekly,
"Jen."
No response came from the cage adjacent to hers. She was about to call out again when not much more than a squeak from a mouse returned.
"Jen's not here right now. Can I take a message?"
She sounded a lot weaker than she had the day before.
"Just hold on,"
Debbie said, with all the optimism she could muster.
"My brother will save us. He'll be here soon."
After fueling up, the crew decided to sample some of Mama Bertald's barbecue lunch special with about 24 hitchhikers and semi-drivers. After gagging down what they decided was Mama Bertald's roadkill special, they stood around the cash register divvying up the bill when the cashier/cook and probably the guy who went out and scooped up the roadkill all rolled into one, strolled out of the kitchen wiping the remains of deep-fried prairie dog or coyote or whatever the buzzards hadn't beat him to on his apron.
How was everything?
He asked, scanning the expressions of another group of satisfied customers.
Heisenberg?
Skeet asked.
What the hell you doing here?
The man looked over the till at Skeeter and replied with a smooth Texas drawl.
Sorry, friend. The name's Birchall.
You sure it's not Heisenberg or Hindenburg or Heineken?
The man smiled.
Not unless my mama lied to me.
He closed the till.
Y'all have a nice day,
he said over his shoulder and walked back through the swinging doors to the kitchen.
Now I know what they call these gas station cafes choking pukes, bro,
Abe said on his way back to the truck. Skeeter and Yancey held back while everyone else piled into the trucks.
You think there could be two dudes that ugly?
Skeeter asked.
With the same scar on his left cheek?
Yancey said, tapping his cheek. Skeeter turned to go back in the diner, but Yancey grabbed him by the arm.
Hold up there, partner,
he said, turning them back around.
Whatever that dude's game is, traipsing after him ain't gonna find your niece, am I right?
Yancey shook his head.
I'm right. So let's split like the gap in Madonna's teeth.
Oh, she got that fixed,
Skeet said nonchalantly.
Oh, really?
Yancey said nonchalantly. Skeeter slapped Yancey on the arm and said nonchalantly,
All right, ready, set, go,
and ran for his truck. This had sort of become their way of keeping each other in check when one of them was about to do something stupid, so it happened quite often. The traffic was finally starting to thin out when Yancey decided to shut her down for the night, given the fact that everyone's innards were starting to rumble after Mama Bertald's gutbuster lunch. He pulled into the first motel that came into sight, and after checking in, they all made a mad dash for their rooms, a clinching and a praying. The next morning, after a quick but filling continental breakfast, they were on the road again. After a few hours of steady progress, Yancey's truck slowed down and eased over to the shoulder of the freeway. Skeet's phone rang and he picked it up.
You broke down, Hoser Brown?
He asked, amused with his poetic prowess.
No,
Yancey said.
I'm just enjoying the scene.
Holy shit! It's Slick Willie!
Skeet howled. looking up at a 50-foot billboard that read in huge cursive letters, "Welcome to Texas." The Hollywood handsome face of the mysterious agent leered down at him with those gleaming white teeth flashing bright under that cute little go-to-hell goatee, and still topped off with that ever-perfect jet-black do. Completely perplexed, Skeet asked,
What in the actual fuck is going on here?
There's only one thing I know for sure, Pard.
Yancey snickered.
Our phone conversation's being listened to. Herman the German showing up in the middle of nowhere, and now Slick Willie welcoming us to Texas. It's all a coincidence. Let's keep moving.
The phone did its double click and went silent. Skeet looked up, still coveting that slick, manly coif as Yancey merged into traffic.
Man, this is some X-Files shit we got going on here,
Skeet muttered. A low melodic chant brought Debbie out of an uneasy sleep. At first she thought a feeble moan had come from Jennifer. Weak and confused, she assumed her hair must have somehow gotten matted to the damp earth, preventing her from raising her head. Instead, with a great amount of effort, she raised her eyelids and focused her vision.
Jen,
She tried to say, but only a dry, coarse moan emanated, and her throat burned for the effort. Jennifer was still. The chorus of voices trailed off, and Debbie's eyes closed.
Brian will come. I know.
James and Abe stared in amazement as they approached the outskirts of Dallas.
How in the hell are we supposed to find one person in all of that?
Abe asked. Yancey didn't have an answer. Corndog reached between the seats and unzipped a backpack. He sat down again and opened the laptop. While he waited for it to power up, he said,
Debbie told me one time she danced at the Wild Rose, I think.
He brought up a map and started typing.
She said it was off I-35.
Skeet called Yancey and they pulled into a burger joint. While they ate, Corndog brought up the map of Dallas again and showed Yancey where I-35 was.
See if you can find us a decent motel nearby in case we need to regroup,
Yancey suggested. Skeet definitely thought it was a good idea. Hell, they hadn't even made it to the crowded part of the city yet, and he was about as confused as a hound dog in a perfume factory. Corndog opened his backpack and slid his laptop in the main compartment. Then he unzipped a smaller pocket and pulled out a handful of pictures he had printed off and handed the stack to Yancey.
Damn, dude,
Abe said.
She es muy bonita.
The picture was of Debbie holding a glass of beer in some crowded bar, her tousled auburn hair framing those deceptively angelic features. And if it wasn't some trick of the camera, she had the most dazzling blue eyes Abe had ever seen.
Yeah, dog,
James said, looking at the picture.
How did you turn out so goddamn ugly?
Corndog frowned and sniffed back a tear.
My dad tells me all the time Mom had an affair with Howdy Doody.
Corndog chuckled at his own expense.
Okay,
Skeet said, wadding up an empty wrapper.
let's get this show on the road.
The side street off I-35 was empty. The few pedestrians on the sidewalks held signs or pushed shopping carts filled with their earthly belongings, shuffling aimlessly to somewhere other than where they were.
Looks like we're a little bit early for the party,
Yancey said. They found the Wild Rose and stopped. Abe tried the door, then walked back to the truck.
Sign says they're open at 10 p.m.
Skeet pulled up alongside and rolled down his window.
Doesn't look like we can do much till tonight,
Yancey said. Corndog shook his head in frustration.
I'm going to the cops. They weren't any help when my parents talked to them, but maybe. Don't waste your time, boy,
my man said, as he pushed an overflowing cart between the trucks. The conversation stopped. Skeet unholstered his pistol from under the seat and watched the hooded man approach in the mirror.
Cops ain't gonna come around here,
the homeless vagabond said, keeping his eyes low. Skeet thought he recognized something familiar in the man's voice.
Who are you?
He asked.
Just another lost soul and trying to find his...
You ever work at a gas station outside of Gatlinburg?
Skeet asked. The man wheeled, leaving his cart behind. Yancey threw his door open, blocking the vagrant's escape, or so he thought. The man dropped with athletic agility and rolled under Yancey's truck. Abe bailed out of the passenger side and grabbed at the fleeing man's shoulder, but only succeeded in pulling off his tattered overcoat. James bolted from the back seat and followed the man toward the alley behind the Wild Rose. He rounded the corner, expecting to be hot on the man's heels, but found no one but a half-starved alley cat crouched and hissing at him. The crew gathered behind the building and searched the lot. Not that there was much to search. 2 empty dumpsters and a stack of crates. Finally, bewildered, they decided to give up. The homeless Houdini took out his phone and dialed as he watched the trucks pull away. Peering over the ledged roof of the Wild Rose, he made his report, then hung up.
Y'all come back now, you hear?
He said in his well-practiced Creole Cadian accent. Skeeter and Yancey stood at the front desk of the motel, eyeing the old receptionist suspiciously. They eyed the other guests and the maid they passed in the hall. Hell, Yancey even eyed Skeeter. Skeeter eyed Yancey likewise.
Go fondle a sheep,
Skeet said.
Go tug a bull,
Yancey said. Yep, still Skeeter and Yancey. Skeet shared a room with Corndog. Abe and James bunked together, and Yancey had a room to himself. After 2 days on the road, a nice afternoon nap was more than welcome. At around 9 o'clock, Abe went from room to room, knocking and calling.
Housekeeping? Do you want clean towels?
They all met up in Yancey's room since it was the least cluttered. They discussed the plan, which was simple. Show Debbie's picture around and get as much information as possible. Don't get distracted by boobies, and above all, stick together. Corndog stood, holding the door open.
Okay, let's put boots to blacktop.
No one moved. How long you been waiting to use that one? Yancey asked.
Put rubber to the road? Oh, they're getting worse,
James said.
Wait, I got another one. Let's...
I got one,
Skeet said, walking to the door.
Put boots to ass.
And pushed his nephew into the hall.
Skid him,
Abe said, and they chased the little dipsquirt to the truck. 2 right turns and 4 blocks south, and they were back on the side street where the Wild Rose had sat empty a few hours before.
What a mess,
Yancey said. The traffic was bumper to bumper and the sidewalks were packed. Groups comprised mostly of men, and just about every race you could think of stood in long lines, smoking, drinking, and waiting to get into the clubs that lined the strip. Yancey found an empty parking space and pulled up far enough to give Skeet room to pull in behind. They wound their way down the block and took their place in line outside the Wild Rose. After standing in line for around 10 minutes, slowly inching toward the entrance, some dude hobbled up like one leg was about 6 inches shorter than the other and asked,
Y'all want some hootay?
Skeet spoke for the group.
What the fuck are you talking about?
The dude stood on his short leg and pointed across the street to a couple of ladies, using the term loosely.
Hootay, brother. Cleaners on the strip.
Abe shoved the barrel of his pistol into the dude's kidney and said something in Spanish. Even if the dude didn't understand the language, the intent was clear.
It's cool,
he said, raising his hands passively before moving on.
Something tells me we ain't in Kansas no more,
Yancey said. Abe tucked his pistol under his shirt tail and they paid their way in. A big fella with tattoos from the top of his head down to who knows where stood inside the doorway, repeating his mantra.
2 drink minimum, no touching the girls. 2 drink minimum, no touching the girls.
As they pushed their way in, the music got louder, so the conversations got louder, to the point where it was all just ear-splitting noise. Then suddenly the lights went out. Skeeter was about to reach for his phone when a spotlight lit the stage. A smooth female voice came over the PA, welcoming everyone to the Wild Rose as a cheer went up. This was nothing like what Skeeter envisioned the place was going to look like. He'd pictured a few seedy-looking characters lining the sides of a catwalk, wearing trench coats and waving dollar bills. Abe kept his hand on Skeeter's shoulder as they made their way to the bar at the back. A topless lady smiled sort of mischievously and asked,
What can I get for you, cowboy?
Skeet looked her in the eyes and held up the picture of Debbie. The girl's smile faded away.
You cops?
She hollered as the music started up again. Corndog stepped up and yelled,
She's my sister.
What's your name?
Corndog.
She stared at him like he had said Ulysses S. Grant.
Brian.
He clarified. She tapped the girl's shoulder that stood next to her and spoke in her ear. The other girl nodded and she waggled a beckoning finger. Stepping out from behind the bar, she took a t-shirt and slipped it on. Skeet gestured for Yancey and the brothers to hold back, and he and Corndog followed the young bartender. They walked past a bouncer who was about as wide as he was tall and went through a door that led to a back room. When the door closed, the music dropped to a thumping drum beat.
Lock that door,
the girl said. She spoke fast.
Go to the next door on the right. Tell the bouncer you have a delivery for Dino. The bouncer will probably tell you to go fuck off. Pass him a 50 and he'll let you in. And remember, you didn't talk to me. You've never even seen me before.
Okay, thanks,
Corndog said.
Don't thank me,
she said, looking nervously at the door.
Debbie's not the only girl who's gone missing from around here. If you catch whoever took them...
We will. You can count on it,
Skeet said. They walked out, and with a twitch of the head, Skeet signaled for the others to follow. At the next door, Skeeter tried to look passive as he told the human skyscraper,
We've got a delivery for Dino.
Who?
the big man asked. Skeet felt a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He was about to repeat himself when the bouncer smiled and stepped aside. After Skeeter and Corndog walked through the door, the big man stepped in front of Yancey and the rest, closing the door behind him.
2 at a time,
He said, looking down his plump nose at the trio.
House rules.
Inside the door, another bouncer or guard, all things being equal, patted down the 2 delivery men, relieving them of their pistols and knives like it was just par for the course. When they passed through the next door, they were nearly floored by a thick layer of cigar smoke that hung low and thick, diffusing the light in the center of the room to a dull yellow glow.
Shut the door. You're letting the smoke out,
a raspy voice ordered. Skeeter stooped and walked to the 4 men sat at a card table. All 4 had ledger books open before them on the cluttered table. 3 had calculators, while the 4th, a thin, reedy man with pop-bottle glasses, had an adding machine sat off to the side, his fingers blurring over the digits. The red buds of their cigars glowed like blinking Christmas tree lights.
Well, what have you got for me?
Are you Dino?
Corndog asked.
No, I'm Mary fucking Poppins.
A roly-poly man, upholstered in an extra-large silk shirt, snorted. The other men cackled obediently.
Well, Mary, I'll have a message for you,
Corndog hissed. Dino met eyes with him, gnawing his cigar impatiently.
Well, what is it? Debbie Sanderson says hello.
The adding machine went quiet. Dino's plump jaw stopped gnawing. A knock came at the door, momentarily breaking the tension. Then it swung open. The 2 burly guards stood shoulder to shoulder in the doorway.
Dozer, Kiloton, why ain't you at your posts?
Dino barked. The giant on the right fell first, causing the floor to quake around him. Yancey thrust a boot into the back of the second giant's knee, just like he had seen his future father-in-law do, and the result was the same. The man crumpled on the ground like a cheerleader's dress after the prom. Yancey, James, and Abe stepped between the 2 mountains with pistols drawn. When Skeet and Corndog turned their attention back to the men at the card table, they found themselves staring at a small arsenal. Yancey handed Corndog his pistol, then he cocked Skeet's .45 and handed it to him, pretending to drop it mid-exchange. Dino didn't flinch. In fact, a thin smile crossed his lips.
I believe that it was called a Mexican standoff.
He cast a smile at James, who was circling the table. Suddenly, the barrel of James's .22 revolver pressed against Dino's pulsing left temple, and the next second, the barrel of Abe's pistol pressed against his right temple.
This is what's known as a Peruvian standoff, pinche pendejo,
James said, reaching down and taking the midnight special out of Dino's chubby little paw. One by one, his companions set their guns on the table. Dino spat his cigar on the floor and crushed it out. Then, with his patience at an end, he snarled,
"Do you know who y'all fucking with, pendejos? I don't give a shit if you're Santa Claus, and it's 3 L's, asshole,"
Corndog said as he gathered the guns off the table.
"You're gonna tell me where my sister is."
He didn't offer an alternative. Dino smiled defiantly. Corndog smashed the butt of his gun into the fat man's nose, splattering blood across the books on the table. Then he whirled the gun and pressed the barrel against Dino's forehead.
"Smile at me again.
The door cracked open, again flooding the room with music. Yancey turned and stood ready to start slinging lead if need be. That's when the situation went from weird to Twilight Zone weird. Slick Willie stepped cautiously into the room, hands held out at shoulder level.
"How's everyone's evening going so far?"
No one answered. He didn't have his jacket on, and with his sleeves of his pressed white shirt rolled up, he kinda looked like one of those actors who's not a doctor, but plays one on TV. Hell, he even held a syringe sorta daintily in his hand.
"Now, I'm not trying to tell you boys how to operate,"
he said, still easing forward.
"but it might be time to change tactics."
Still no one spoke. Finally, one of the Christmas elves said in a grave tone,
"Sodium pentothal." "What, this?"
Slick Willie laughed, pointing at the syringe.
"No, not even the CIA uses sodium pentothal anymore. Mr. Olivas, would you hold his arm still, please?"
Dino struggled, but was no match for Abe's strength. The mysterious stranger continued.
"This makes sodium pentothal look like Mountain Dew. Now, first you're going to feel your arm getting warm. Then you're going to feel happy. Kinda like it's your birthday."
The syringe came closer.
"Then, you're going to tell Mr. Sanderson here exactly what he wants to know."
Those handsome brown eyes came up to meet Corndog's.
"Ask specific questions."
He turned his attention back to his hapless patient.
"Then you're going to crap your pants, convulse once, and die."
The needle pressed against the corpulent man's skin.
Goodnight Lane!
Dino screeched.
The abandoned waterworks on Goodnight Lane!
"You're lying!"
The handsome man shouted, still trying to line the needle up with the struggling man's vein.
No, I swear, devil worshippers, the Coven of the 12, something or rather, apostles.
The man seated to the right of Dino added.
"How much did you sell her for?"
Corndog asked.
I didn't sell her. They kidnapped the girl and paid me $100,000 to stay quiet,
Dino said, now gasping for air.
"Next question,"
Mr. Handsome said.
"How many girls?"
3!
The fat man interrupted as he began to sob.
Just 3. 1 last year and 2 last week.
Mr. Handsome looked wildly at Corndog.
2 girls?
Then back at Dino.
Who's the other one?
The needle began breaking the skin.
Jennifer Rouse.
Dino cried openly. Sweat ran from his portly face. The handsome man retracted the syringe and stood to face Skeeter.
"Did you get all that?"
he asked, unscrewing the needle from the syringe.
Goodnight Lane, abandoned waterworks.
Skeet recited. Seizing his opportunity, he asked,
Just who in the hell are you?
Slick Willie smiled.
"Do you have time for that, or do you want to save your niece?"
He held up the syringe and squirted the contents into his mouth.
Mountain Dew. I love this stuff."
Enraged, Dino made a lunge for the handsome man. James and Abe pulled him to his seat and held him down forcefully. The homeless man and the fry cook strode into the room, now decked out in dark blue dress suits, handcuffs at the ready. Skeet waved, and the crew of rednecks beat a swift retreat. The two men stood beside Debbie's cage, talking in hushed voices. She no longer wasted her efforts trying to open her eyes or speak or move. The pain that had once racked her entire body had nearly subsided, and the pain that persisted came and went with consciousness. She strained to hear the clandestine conversation. Something began preparing the first sacrifice. Something, the power to summon our Dark Lord.
Shit.
She thought.
Brian, now would be a good time to show up.
As soon as Corndog's ass hit the seat, he had his laptop open and the map brought up. He zoomed in on Dallas, his fingers flying over the keys. He mumbled as he typed.
Good night, Lane. Water system. Abandoned. There!
The hooty salesman, accompanied by his two employees, strolled into the near bumper-to-bumper traffic and began dancing to the honking of horns and profane shouts of pissed-off drivers. Their impromptu street performance created a temporary gap in the traffic that Skeeter and Yancey took advantage of. Making their way south, Corndog read a street sign as they crossed an intersection, then went back to the laptop.
Turn right in 2 blocks,
he said. They started making good time, when out of nowhere a big black Ford with all the extras including GPS blew past quicker than Christ on a comet.
Get her, Yance!
Skeet hollered. They barreled off on a gravel driveway and skidded to a halt in front of a massive steel gate. Yancey, James, and Abe stood in the driveway, and Yancey was about to use his .45 caliber key to open the lock when Corndog said,
"Don't do that."
He and Skeet ran up to join them, and Corndog took a pouch out of his pocket.
"This is no time to fix your makeup, chica,"
James said. In the time it took to make the remark, Corndog had opened the lock and quietly set it on the ground. Then he swiped at James's nuts.
"Chica."
They swung one of the rusty gates open enough to squeeze through and started for a dilapidated steel building when Corndog whispered,
"Stop."
"What now, dog?" James huffed. Corndog gestured to follow him back to the truck, where he eased down the tailgate. He uncovered and unlocked the 2 wooden boxes and opened the lids. By a nearby yard light's amber glow, he took out a harmless-looking backpack, then made a twirling motion with his wrist. Abe turned around and slid his arms through the straps. Sounding a little disappointed, Abe said,
"I thought you had some machine guns for us or something." "Oh, this is better,"
Corndog said, not even trying to hide his excitement. When everyone was kitted out with a backpack, including himself, he took out a green metal tube that barely fit in the 3-foot box, and a black metal case that presumably went with it.
All right, I give you, little spaz. We're not going on a nature hike,
Skeet said. Corndog pointed at Abe's pack.
300 foot of deck cord.
He pointed at James.
20 full sticks of dynamite, caps, and fuses. Yancey, frag grenades. Skeezer, smoke grenades. And I've got a 3-channel radio, C4, electronic detonators, and a little of everything else.
Hold on,
Skeet growled.
All these guys could overthrow a third-world country with the hardware they're packing, and I could make it a little hard to see?
Corndog smiled like he just found a piece of candy in his pocket.
If you're done complaining, Uncle Grumpy Pants, I was saving the best for last.
He passed him the tube and the container.
That ought to make you feel like a real man,
he growled back.
Military surplus RPG and 2 grenades. Don't ask me where I got them.
That's more like it,
Skeet said, measuring the weight of the case. Now, most men, when breaking into a place where they're pretty sure there are devil worshippers inside, would probably crouch down and stay in the shadows. But Skeet, with his bowed back and stiff ribs, decided to just walk up to the front door like he owned the damn place. Besides, he thought, it would look less suspicious if anyone was guarding the place. The door was locked, but Corndog had it open muy pronto. Skeet stepped in and flipped on the light switch.
Are you crazy?
Yancey whispered.
The verdict is still out on that one,
Skeet said, surveying the room.
but would you rather fight someone you can't see or someone you can see?
I'd rather be home watching Gunsmoke reruns,
James said.
I love Lucy.
Abe said.
The monsters.
Corndog said.
The monsters suck.
Abe said.
You're gonna say the monsters suck to the guy carrying 3 bricks of C4?
Skeet verbally bitch-slapped the miscreants.
Ladies, can we focus?
Sorry. Lo siento.
Besides, the A-team kicks all their asses, Yancey said.
Sorry.
When they filed into the room, the 5-man assault team had become an 8-man team. Skeet turned around and almost bumped snouts with Mr. Handsome. Flinching back, he asked,
Where the hell did you come from?
Panama originally,
Slick Willie said, flashing those pearly whites of his. He stuck out his hand and said sharply,
Agent Hernandez.
Skeet shook his hand suspiciously.
This is Agent Brennan.
Hernandez said, pointing at the fry cook / Herman the German.
And this is Agent Cunningham.
The Cajun gas station attendant / homeless guy.
Happy days,
James whispered, earning him a smack to the back of the head from his hermano. Cunningham cleared his throat and said,
Hey, doggy, how y'all boy doing?
In a very convincing Cajun accent.
Look,
Yancey spoke up.
You'll forgive us if we don't start passing out hugs, but you boys been dogging us since. I know,
Hernandez said, waving a passive hand.
But what you don't know is you boys have been secret agents for the last 2 years. Secret agents?
Yancey said.
What the fuck? So secret, in fact,
Hernandez interrupted.
You didn't even know you were working for Uncle Sam.
The redneck ranch hands were more confused than a rooster with 3 peckers.
Do you really think a few backwater hillbillies could have made a first-rate website advertising the hunt of a lifetime?
Cunningham raised his hand.
I knew you couldn't resist that one.
And who slipped your names into a list of so-called alien abductees?
Brennan raised his hand.
That was my doing.
Hernandez continued.
What would have taken us months of red tape, you boys took care of without a single warrant.
We'll discuss our fee later, Yancey said. But right now, don't you think we maybe ought to see if there's any devil worshippers around?
There are,
Hernandez said. He held up a tablet and, using his thumb and forefinger, zoomed in on an image.
Our eye in the sky has been surveilling these 12 suspects.
Glowing infrared bodies stood out in the various rooms.
Here we are,
Hernandez pointed. What are those? Yancey asked, pointing at what looked like 2 orange lumps of clay.
Are those the girls? We believe so,
Hernandez said. Yancey slipped the pack off his back and passed it to Agent Brennan, then went to the front door and opened it.
Where are you going?
Corndog asked.
On the walkabout,
Yancey said over his shoulder and was gone.
That's our insurance policy,
Skeet said. Then, taking one last opportunity to speak his mind, he said,
Listen, Slick, I know I can speak for Yancey when I tell you we don't like being anyone's puppets. And we're all for helping out our country and all, but it would be nice to be asked.
Agent Hernandez flashed that smile that had damn near got him shot once before, and asked,
Just what do you think we're here for, Mr. Bolin?
Skeet shook his head.
Our commander appreciates your service, so this is his way of paying you back. Hopefully when this night is over, we'll be even,
the agent said.
You helped me get my niece out of here in one piece, and I'll never be able to repay you,
Skeet said earnestly. Yancey opened the back door on his truck and pulled a long leather sheath from under the seat. The sky to the east was beginning to glow orange. Knowing he didn't have much time, he slung the rifle over his shoulder and set off. When Skeet and company got to the back door of the warehouse, Hernandez checked his tablet.
There's one on the other side,
he whispered, pointing at the door. Skeet pulled out his toad stabber and knelt down. He began scratching at the bottom of the door with the tip of his knife, whilst making a chattering noise that could have passed for a coon or possum or whatever runs wild in Texas. Hernandez reached into his jacket pocket and quickly uncoiled a length of razor-thin wire with a small handle at each end. Skeet darted aside as the door swung open. Get out of here, you damn... The guard began. Lightning quick, Hernandez slung the garrote around the man's neck and in a single movement caught the whirling handle, twisted, and yanked. Blood sprayed as the man folded in a heap. James and Abe grabbed handfuls of blood-soaked robe and dragged the man's sprawling body away from the door. The dim light of dawn gave the crumbling cement outbuildings that stood on both sides of a gravel yard an eerie post-apocalyptic feel, and the two empty ponds in the expanse beyond the yard smelt faintly of some undefined organic decay.
This might not be the OK Corral,
Skeet whispered,
but it seemed like a pretty good place for a shootout.
Hernandez shot Agent Brennan a hand signal that set the agent in motion, running quietly to the building on the left. He pressed his back to the edifice and advanced toward the first of several fissures in the wall. Another silent order sent Cunningham bounding toward the same building. With the agility of a cheetah, the man reached the wall and leapt scurrying like a spider. He ascended the wall in an instant and was gone. Hernandez flashed a screen in front of Skeeter, James, and Abe, pointing out 4 glowing blips that occupied 2 rooms, separated by the dark representations of walls. Skeet cut and ran for the building on the right, with the brothers hot on his heels. Hernandez peeled to the left, followed by Corndog. The agent, bypassing the door, squeezed through a jagged rent in the concrete and disappeared in the dark confines within. Moments later, a single shot rang out, and the tablet that had been more like a third eye to the lead agent flew out of the crevice. Corndog watched dazedly as the device skipped across the uneven gravel and came to rest, still smoking where a bullet had struck the screen. He felt a pang of dread wash over him. If a well-trained agent could be dispatched that easily, what chance did he have? Then the thought of his sister washed away all doubt. His courage restored, he knew what to do in an instant. Reaching in a side pocket in his pack, he pulled out a flash grenade and pulled the pin. Poised at the side of the door, he threw it open and waited until the wave of hot lead had passed. Then threw the grenade in and plugged his ears. The flashbang went off, producing nearly the same decibels as the real thing. Corndog darted in, instantly seeking cover. A robed figure stood out from behind a rustic conglomeration of pipes and valves, ready to fire, when 3 neat holes appeared in his chest, and he fell away. Hernandez rose from behind the cement ballard and waved his muzzled .38. Corndog looked for a bullet hole in the agent's suit. Hernandez smiled and said, "Bulletproof glass. James Bond, eat your heart out." Skeeter, James, and Abe crouched behind the pile of sacks, taking in their surroundings while they come up with a game plan. There was only one door in the partition that stood between them and their enemies, so there weren't a lot of options. Then Skeet smiled like he had just remembered the one about the prostitute with the nut allergy.
There's nobody in here but us and the bad guys, right?
Yeah,
Abe said tentatively. Skeet slipped the RPG launcher off his shoulder and said,
Then let's be polite and knock.
James looked at Abe with an oh shit expression.
I think these things are supposed to be used outside.
I think that's more of a guideline than a rule,
Skeet said, sliding one of the grenades into the tube. After a few seconds of figuring out how the damn thing worked, Skeet hollered,
Fire in the body hole!
Shards of cement and rebar embedded in the sacks, sending up a cloud of chlorine to mingle with the dust and smoke. The floor shook under their feet and Abe yelled,
Time to leave!
Skeet, being the last man out, barely crossed the threshold as the entire building imploded on itself. Skeet leaned on his haunches, catching his breath, when a Satanist ran out from one of the doors of the building on the left, screaming something about the end is at hand, or some such BS. He hadn't made it more than a few steps when a barely visible wire dropped from the roof and closed around the self-proclaimed apostle's neck and tightened. Warning, if you're one of those people of a sensitive nature, you might want to look away. The head came away from the torso and fell to the ground in a shower of crimson rain. A thumbs up appeared for an instant above the wall and was gone.
Damn, these guys are good, amigos,
James said. Suddenly realizing they were standing out in the open, they made for the building at the south side of the yard. The self-appointed high priest of the quorum of the 12 apostles hissed orders to his minions from beneath his hooded robe. One, and then the other, sacrifices were dragged from their cages and placed on a cement slab that served as their sacrificial altar. The priest, standing alongside the altar, opened his robe, revealing an ancient text that had been carved into his mortal flesh. He held a golden chalice high above his head and spoke in a language not spoken by man for eons. The remaining cult members bowed and chanted dutifully. Then one rose to take the receptacle and place it at the foot of the altar.
One will give her life essence to bring forth our Lord from his underworld realm.
Dust fell from the rafters as the priest's booming words filled the chamber.
And when the other immortal soul has been cast off, this body shall serve as host, so that our Lord and Savior may reside within the kingdom of man. And we, the quorum of the 12 apostles, shall be his generals, and we shall usher forth the end of days.
Corndog watched the approach of his uncle and the ranch hands. He waved to him through the craggy opening in the wall. When they slipped through, Skeeter stepped to the opposite side of the door, where Agent Hernandez stood with his ear to the door.
"Sounds like the rest of them are in there,"
he whispered. What they needed was a diversion, Corndog thought to himself. He circled around Abe and took the roll of det cord from his pack.
Give me 5 minutes,
he said, then exited through the fissure.
Where's he going?
Skeet whispered. James and Abe shrugged. Corndog rounded the backside of the building, and there, standing solid and erect, like a groom on his wedding night, was a tall rectangular chimney.
Cunningham.
The name had barely passed Corndog's lips when, quicker than a streaker at a paintball tournament, the nimble agent's head appeared over the wall. Corndog held one end of the cord and threw the roll to the agent, while instructing him to string it behind the chimney and drop the remaining cord back down. They repeated the process until the roll was used up. When Corndog finished attaching the detonator, he looked up ready to tell Cunningham to clear out, but apparently Agent Cunningham wasn't one to hang around. Corndog stepped quietly through the fissure and checked his watch. He held up his hand, and the others watched wearily as he counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The explosive charge shook the building violently. Skeet threw the door open and led the charge into the dust-filled room. Confusion reigned as stray lead and oaths of anger filled the room. Skeet found cover behind the stem wall that ran the length of the room and ended at the west wall, where a jagged aperture recently hewn into heavy concrete by a roll of detonating cord allowed a modicum of natural light to seep in. Moments later, Corndog joined his uncle, ducking every time another chunk of cement was dislodged from the top of the wall by hot lead. One of the quorum members in particular must have unduly thought himself immortal. He stood in the open, firing indiscriminately. What was keeping the emboldened soldier of evil alive, however, wasn't some divine providence, though. It was the other quorum members that were entrenched behind the stem wall at the opposite side of the room, firing a constant volley of lead. Corndog was about to do something very foolish when Agent Brennan crept up behind the exposed Satanist. Clasping one hand over the man's forehead and pulling it back, he drew a butterfly knife across the would-be general's throat, leaving a thin red line in its path. The man's eyes rolled back and he folded. So much for immortality. Hernandez slid in behind Corndog.
There's no way to get a better angle on the last two,
he said, replacing his spent magazine. James stood just outside the doorway, returning the occasional shot that came his way.
James!
Corndog yelled.
Throw me your pack!
The pack landed in his waiting arms, and he unzipped it.
This ought to do the trick,
he said, cramming a cap into the corn dog. He cut a fuse about a foot long and lit it, but instead of throwing it right away, he looked at Skeeter musingly. Then, in a spirited voice, he sang,
Hello, Daddy! Hello, Mom!
Mom, your chit.
Corndog threw the package and plugged his ears.
Cherry and bomb!
Blood, guts, ass, and teeth filled the air as two more of the devil's own got to meet the god they so devoutly worshipped. Cautiously, Skeet stood up and stepped over the cement wall, his pistol held at the ready just in case one of the quorum of the nut jobs had survived the onslaught. Corndog climbed up on the wall and scanned the room.
There they are!
He hit the ground running toward the altar at the far side of the room. His excitement quickly turned to dread at seeing his sister lying motionless on the slab. He slipped off his pack and dropped it to the floor, then gently slid his arms under her. Her slender frame seemed almost weightless as he raised her. James, Abe, and the other two agents stepped in, each slipping off his pack and adding them to the pile as Skeet hurried to the altar. Leaning over to reach the other girl, he was caught completely off guard when from behind the altar, the high priest sprang up. Raising the ceremonial obsidian blade above his head, the half-crazed Satanist swore an oath that damn near made Skeet blush. But before the blade could start its downward death thrust, James and Abe drew and fired, fanning the hammers of their pistols again and again until the chambers clicked empty. Skeet bore the girl away as the Satanist's lifeless body collapsed upon the altar. Skeet followed Corndog, and along with the Olivas brothers, they headed for the truck. Agent Hernandez took stock of the aftermath and then, in a moment of realization, asked,
Has anyone seen Mr. Tannehill?
Agent Cunningham pointed toward the field beyond the ponds and said,
The last I saw of him, he was standing out there.
He walked to the west wall and peered out the opening at the tiny stick figure. Bewildered, he said,
He's still standing there.
You think he was just scared to fight? Agent Brennan asked. That thought drew a snort from Hernandez.
Not the Tannehill I know.
The agents walked along an overgrown footpath that skirted the ponds. When they had almost reached Yancey, who still hadn't budged an inch, Hernandez noticed that Yancey was watching the building with unwavering attention. Blood ran from the unholy priest's body down the altar and dripped off the edge, slowly filling the golden chalice that lay at the base of the slab. The earth began to quake as the blood boiled. Gray smoke began to billow up and take shape, then following the trail of blood made its way to the priest's prone body. Natural and unnatural orifices alike accepted the life essence into the priest's lately quit body. Slowly, the body began to morph and move with unnatural animation. Cloven hooves replaced human feet. Teeth became jagged, elongated fangs. Gnarled horns ripped through the fleshly temples. As every part of the unnatural creature expanded and took on its demonic shape. Then, in an instant, the beast let out a triumphant bellow that shook the pillars of both heaven and hell. The government agents whirled to witness what had been prophesied in biblical texts throughout the eons. With the transformation complete, the beast stood to its full height, nearly scraping the ceiling with its misshapen horns. It reached under and flung the massive altar aside with ease, then bellowed again. A sudden shot rang out. The agents turned to see Yancey posed like a pitcher on the mound, with his granddad's rifle still shouldered. Of course, one paltry bullet posed no threat to a demonic god, but the supersonic projectile was never intended for it. Yancey's target was relatively small, black, and lying in a heap on the floor. When the bullet hit home, a sudden shockwave raised the roof as the walls blew out. Again the earth shook, as a vortex rose out of the bedlam. Lightning crashed as dust and debris was swept up in the rising torrent, and then, as if pulled down by a giant vacuum, the chaotic storm vanished in a brilliant flash. Yancey slung the rifle over his shoulder as Agent Cunningham walked up to stand beside him. Yancey could tell the agent was busting the gut to say something. Then, doing a roughly similar impersonation of Robert Redford, he asked, "You, think you used enough dynamite there, Butch?" The next afternoon, Hernandez quietly stepped into the hospital room where Debbie Sanderson and Jennifer Ross lay peacefully recovering. Skeeter stood up from an uncomfortable armchair and stretched his throbbing back. The agent sat a vase of flowers on the stand between the girls' beds, then turned back to Skeeter.
"Where's your posse?"
he asked with a smile.
Everyone went to get breakfast. I decided to stay in case Deb wakes up.
"You're a good man, Mr. Bolin,"
Hernandez said, extending a friendly hand. Skeet shook it, then asked,
What's this?
The sleigh agent had slipped him a piece of paper. Skeet unfolded it and read aloud.
The Territory Salon for Men. Haircut number 117.
He smiled and looked up at the agent's ever-impeccable do.
"Be sure and tell them Slick Willie sent you,"
Hernandez said.
"They'll give you the full treatment."
3 weeks later, Corndog called his uncle to tell him the good news. The girls were released from the hospital, and Debbie was back at their parents' place recovering, and doing good. She didn't think she'd be doing any dancing for a while, though. Everyone fell into their old routines again, just like before they'd saved the world from Satan himself. No big deal. The hay was baled and put up, and Skeet and Yancey had some free time on their hands, so they headed into town and found the Territory Salon for Men. Skeet practically skipped to the door. When he told the lady at the counter Slick Willie sent him, things started happening. He was sat in a chair, and it seemed like about everyone who could squeeze in was doing something. Washing, rinsing, trimming, shaving, and cutting.
"This is kind of like watching a pit stop at the Indy 500,
Yancey thought.
I wonder if they're going to throw in an oil change.
When Skeet came out from under the hairdryer, his hair got sprayed down with about 5 gallons of lacquer, and the stylist went to work. Yancey sat in a waiting chair, reading an old Outdoor Life magazine. Every time Skeet looked his way, he shot him an encouraging thumbs up. Finally, the flamboyant stylist threw her hands up.
Perfection!
Skeet tried to pay, but the lady at the counter just smiled and said,
There's no charge for a friend of Willie's.
Skeet walked out the door looking like he had just won a set of free tickets to the PBR finals. They climbed up in the cab of his old Fleet Side, and he adjusted the mirror to check out the new Skeeter Bolin. He turned his head and caught sight of the jerry curls where his sideburns had been. His smile faded. He readjusted the mirror higher and higher, finally coming to the top of the hideous mountain of hair. Looking away, Yancey bit his lip and tried to think about something, anything else. His old pal looked like a go-go dancer straight out of the 60s. Skeet snarled, and Yancey plugged his ears as the fuse burnt down.
Hernandez!
And that was Skeeter and Yancey Do Dallas by author Lynn Jenkins. A good reminder that sometimes similes do beat metaphors. Also, don't be so quick to dismiss your pyromaniac nephew, friends. The world is a stage, and we all have a part to play. A little about the author. When Lynn Jenkins isn't writing stories, he enjoys flying his Learjet to Vegas and cruising the Strip in his Lamborghini, then going home to his multi-million-dollar ranch and his supermodel girlfriend. Unfortunately, Lynn's been daydreaming while writing his biography. Lee, would you please slap your dad? Thank you. But in all seriousness, Lynn would like everyone to know he'll be publishing his first young adult novel, 229 Birchwood Street, on Amazon Books very soon, along with the continuing saga of Skeeter and Yancey. We'll keep you posted on both. Check the show notes for a link to this story on Amazon. And when we can get the fella to sign up for some social media, we'll keep you posted on that too. Thanks, Dr. Jenkins.
And do old Drew Blood a favor, would you? Subscribe to his podcast wherever you do your listening and leave him a 5-star review and a kind word, even if you're listening on YouTube. He needs soldiers on all fronts to win this battle, and he appreciates it. To hear a premium ad-free edition of tonight's and all the other episodes, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click Patrons in the upper menu. You'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can become a patron for as little as $5 per month and get access to their entire audio archive, all ad-free and available to download or stream. Thank you for your time and for supporting our sponsors. When you support our sponsors, you support this show. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all the latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with them each and every week. Oh, and you can find Drew Blood on Facebook and Instagram, and sometimes Twitter. The Drew Blood's Dark Tales podcast is accepting submissions, friend. If you've got a story or two you'd like to be featured on the show, send it to drewbloodhorror@gmail.com. If selected, you'll get the full treatment, 10 bananas.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we part ways, at least till next week. So grab a drink for the road, friend, but don't wander off too far. Next week will be here before you know it. I'd like to say hello and thank you to all the fans out there who listen to the show every week and leave all the kind comments on YouTube. They're much appreciated, y'all. Keep 'em coming. So may the wind be at your back, and may the road rise up to meet you. And if you run into a cranky sumo wrestler out there, offer him a little baby powder. And unrelated, go fuck yourself. You too, Chester. Good night, y'all.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.